Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. My deepest apologies for the technical problems. I hope you all remained on the same screen and didn't sign off. Today we do have a special, some special content because we are going to be bridging between Chapter 13 and Chapter 14. So we are going to have the last verse of Chapter 13, and then we'll have a summary of Chapter 13, and then an introduction or an overview of Chapter 14. And I don't know if we'll have time, but we'll try to cover at least one verse of Chapter 14. So we will also have plenty of quotes from Jnanadev and Shankaracharya. I have a lot of Jnanadev quotes today, and I hope we have time to read them because they're so beautiful. But because we're going to hear the summary of the Chapter 13 afterwards, we will go straight into verse 35, chanting together. You can chant after me. Kshetra kshetrajnayor kshetra kshetrajnayor evam antaram jnana chakshusha bhuta prakriti mokshancha ye vidur yanti te param. And I've made some changes to the translation here just to make it easier to read. They who thus, with the eye of knowledge, or the eye, I would say wisdom is better. They who thus, with the eye of wisdom, perceive the distinction between the Kshatra and the Kshatrajna, as well as the liberation of beings from material nature or Prakruti, they go to the Supreme. So once again, Krishna is summarizing the whole teaching of this chapter, and he is emphasizing the benefit of that teaching, which was pretty much the same theme as the previous verse. So what is the aim of all these Vedantic teachings? Not just the ones that are in the Bhagavad Gita, but that are in these texts like the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. Well, the aim is to differentiate the Kshatra and Kshatrajna. If you remember the meaning, Kshatra means the whole universe of matter. Everything that we know and see and can perceive with our senses, and many things we cannot as well, like the mind and the intellect. It's all Maya, according to Vedanta. And that is the Kshatra. It is ultimately inert matter of varying kinds. You say, how can my mind be matter? Well, it's not matter in the sense that science knows, but it is still the 5 elements, but in the subtler level of Panchatanmatras. We went through this already. You can watch one of the previous classes to see that explanation. But the point is that we ourselves, according to Vedanta, are the knower of the field, Kshetra, and we are not the matter that makes up this universe. So we have to constantly differentiate those two. Otherwise, we have a big problem, which is samsara. If we don't differentiate these two properly, we will, by force of that wrong judgment, we will fall into samsara and suffer like we are right now. It's straight and simple. Samsara happens when we don't differentiate them. And when your understanding of these two, Kshatra and Kshatrajna, or we could say Maya and consciousness, when we misunderstand these two, when they get mixed up, that is when we are going to suffer. Suffering will surely follow. So the remedy for sorrow and suffering is to keep them differentiated cognitively all the time. That's a tall order, I know. So we're not saying that we're going to do that today or tomorrow. But know that that is Amma's state, and that is where she's trying to lead us as well. So what does that look like for someone like us? It means that we try not to forget that the body is perishable, or preferably we never forget that the body is perishable. That would be even better, although it's more difficult. And even before it perishes, we should remember that it is the body and our identification with that and the mind and the intellect that gives us all the grief throughout their existence. And the same goes for, it's not just the body, right? The mind and the intellect. The mind is a den of negative thoughts and emotions, and eventually loses its luster, as Amma says. And same with the intellect. At one point, when we're little, we have minimal capacities that way, and then at the end of life, we have the same problem. In between, the mind and the intellect shine for a few moments, and then it's gone. But in Amma's case, and what should also be our goal, is to remember that I am not all those things. I'm not the mind. It may have its own problems, fine. I'm just going to go along with it only when I have to. Other than that, that's the mind's problem. I am the knower of the mind. I'm the one who witnesses the intellect, who witnesses the body and all these things. So I am Kshatrajna. That is the constant remembrance that we need to protect ourselves from suffering in samsara. I'm the indweller of the body, not the body. Dehi, not the deha. And there is a way of knowing that or acquiring that knowledge, and Krishna refers to that as the eye of wisdom. This is a Vedantic term for, in a Western sense, we could call it the cognitive capacity to keep the Kshatra and the Kshatrajna constantly differentiated. So the ability to see everything, this is just Maya. I don't need anything. The body needs a place to sleep. Okay, so the body, which is matter, is going to need a bed, which is matter, and let them have their relationship. I don't have any relationship with that. That's for the body. And remembering that all the time. I know, it's not easy. So for this process, more than a sharp intellect, it requires a subtle one. I'll give you an example. This example has been used before, in explaining these points by different commentators, but it's helped me understand the concept. So let's say you want to cut firewood. You take an axe. If you have a dull axe, you're not going to get anywhere. So you need a sharp axe to cut the firewood, and then you're in good shape. But what if you're a brain surgeon? You can say, well, I have a very sharp hatchet at home. Would you like to use that? And he'll say, well, I like the sharpness part about it, but it's hatchet's not going to do it. We need something very subtle. So, and the subtlety is the most important point there. For something that is very, maybe not microscopic, but something on a subtle level within us. This is not brain surgery. This is actually mind surgery, which is even more subtle than the brain. So you don't want an axe, you want something more like a scalpel or a spiritual scalpel to go in there and cut off those attachments and identifications. So Jnanadev's take on this term of the eye of wisdom is that the intellect that comes to realize the distinction between the Kshatra and the Kshatrajna is the one that truly sees. And it alone can grasp the essence of the interpretations of the words. So when we are reading something, if we don't have this ability to distinguish Maya from consciousness, Kshatra from Kshatrajna, we are not going to grasp the full meaning of what Krishna is saying, of Amma is saying, or what any scripture says. So that is actually a little bit disappointing, but it also helps us focus on the right thing. It means we have to make our mind more subtle. which means a lot of mantra japa, a lot of inward lookingness, archana, bhajans. All these things are to help us take the mind inwards and reduce our desires, which is what takes the mind outward. So Shankaracharya also has something to say here, which is, the I is the realization in the form of the knowledge of the self, which arises from following the instructions of the scriptures and the acharyas. Acharya just means the teachers, or in our case we would say Satguru. And that means scriptures for us are awakened children, bare minimum awakened children, and Amma's words and actions. Right? So when they say follow the acharyas, we don't go out and try and find an acharya. We have Amma. And we're already not following her example well enough. So there's no need to find somebody else, because you're going to have the same problem there. And then they also won't be Amma's level. There's nobody like Amma. So we need to appreciate the value and preciousness of that guidance from Amma. And in the case of someone who didn't have a Sadguru, a realized master, they also should be grateful they have the Gita teaching, at least. And Jnanadev emphasizes that preciousness of receiving this knowledge from one who knows. And this is what he says. The wise ones worship the very doors of the people of knowledge to be able to understand the distinction between the Kshatra and the Kshatrajna, Maya and consciousness. So even one who looks for someone who can teach them the difference, even that person is being called wise. Not a knower, but wise. And it is for this that the wise hoard the wealth of tranquility and feed in their homes the milch cattle in the form of scriptures. Some treat all their possessions as mere straw, including the body, and take to service devoutly and humbly at the feet of Mahatmas. So they're saying, like, we're the lucky bunch. That's what he's saying. Some people have that wonderful grace in life to be able to serve a Mahatma. And the rest of the people, they just have to read the scripture. That's all they have, is the scriptures. So we should not take anything for granted. Remember that. And the verse itself, he says, as well as the liberation of beings from material Prakrti. Okay, so material nature means Prakrti, which we've talked about, or Krishna has talked about in this chapter quite a lot. Liberation from Prakrti. What does that mean? Because it doesn't mean you can actually get rid of it. Remember, he said it's beginningless and endless. So it's not going to go away in reality. I mean, in terms of for everybody else also, it's not like we're going to all gang up and get rid of Prakrti. It's going to be there. Maya will always be there so long as the Brahman is there, which is forever. So Shankaracharya helps us understand what Krishna means by this. And he says, it means the annihilation of Prakrti. Annihilation? I thought we can't get rid of it, right? Well, because Prakrti, this term Prakrti, is the seed of the creation, right? So the material cause of the entire universe is what is meant by that word Prakrti. Here, in this chapter, if you were to read one of Amma's other books, she has a book, Prakrtiyam Manushanam, something like that, Manushanam Prakrtiyam, means man and nature, which many of you may have read in English. There, Amma's talking about Mother Nature, not about this technical, philosophical Prakrti. So, how is it possible to get liberation from Prakrti, or to, quote-unquote, annihilate Prakrti? And this is the only way to do it, is by realizing that Prakrti does not have any independent existence at all. So Prakrti is merely the shadow of Purusha, or we can call it Brahman, a more common way of referring to it, which means it is as good as non-existent. Just an example. So the sun rises and you go outside and your shadow is really long. And then at 9 o'clock, it's not so long anymore. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock on the dot. You look, where'd my shadow go? It's gone. It's annihilated. Because it doesn't have any individual existence of its own. Without the sun, there's no shadow. Again, you go out at nighttime, there's no shadow. What happened to my shadow? It was destroyed because it doesn't have its own existence. That's, in that sense, we should say that, you know, in a way, you could say that the darkness, in the darkness, the shadow of Maya disappears. But anyhow, the idea is that the knowledge of that we are Brahman dispels that shadow of Maya, so that we never believe it's real ever again, which means we attain moksha. So with this verse, Lord Krishna concludes his summary and explanation of the benefit of his teachings, and this brings chapter 13 to a close. Now we will go over the entire chapter because I don't remember exactly when we started it, but I know it was more than a month ago, possibly 2 months ago. And for that reason, we need to remind ourselves. Some people may have joined midstream, etc. So the 13th chapter began with Arjuna's request for clarification on 6 topics. He said, I wish to learn about nature / Prakruti, which means material or matter, and the spirit, Purusha, which is sometimes translated as the soul, but it means consciousness. And I also want to learn about the field and the knower of the field, Kshatra and Kshatrajna. I want to know about knowledge and that which ought to be known. The rest of the chapter is Krishna's response to this question. Now, mind you, depending on the version of the Gita that you pick up, some versions like Shankaracharya Bhasha does not include that first verse. It is assumed or whatever, Krishna just starts talking. But in the ashram version, it has Arjuna posing a question to which Krishna responds. It doesn't really matter. It's what the topics are covered in the chapter, and that's there either way. In our version, there is the question. So it was from verse 2 to 7 that we got an explanation of Kshatra and Kshatrajna. First, Krishna said, this body is called Kshatra, and the one who knows it is called Kshatrajna. Very simple, right? No, not so simple actually. Because this body is not just my body or your body, it's all bodies. And all bodies means all matter. It means the tree has a body also. The grass has a body. You know, every worm and amoeba has a body. And everything has some kind of body. So all of this that we call the universe, that becomes the Kshatra. And for us, it's more commonly known as simply Maya, although technically speaking, Maya is more like the sum total of everything. But what it is the material universe. And then he says, know me as the Kshatrajna in all Kshatras, Arjuna. A little later in that section. We're in the second section of the 13th chapter, which is from verse 2 to 7. And he says, know me as the knower of all the bodies. So the knower in every body, including, we would have to include plants, subtle beings, anything that has any some kind of sentience, right? That is all. Krishna claims that to be himself. And that can only be the consciousness principle. And later on, he says it's not just limited to sentient beings, but here he makes it easy for us. And after this brief statement about the knower of the field, or the pure consciousness, Krishna spends the rest of that section by way differentiating the field from the knower of the field, the matter from consciousness. And in the last two verses of that section, which is 6 and 7, he gave a lot of examples that qualify as the Kshatra. Basically Maya, practically speaking. And it ends up being pretty much everything we know about ourselves and the entire universe. So the conclusion is that anything that you can perceive or objectify is the field, is Kshatra, is Maya. And it is an object, right? Anything you can objectify is the Kshatra. But there's only one thing that you cannot objectify, and that is the one who illuminates that, who sees it, who experiences it. The witness of it all. Or you could say the subject who is objectifying everything in the universe. And that is what is meant by Kshatrajna. It simply means Brahman. The next section was verse 8 to 12, where we heard the third topic from Krishna, which was called Jnanam, which means knowledge, but we found out that really what it was referring to was a collection of 20 virtues, disciplines, or values that help facilitate our path to self-knowledge. And in this section, Krishna gave so many important disciplines and virtues, and some feel really especially applicable to us because they sound like Amma's teachings, and they also feel like our duty to her as her children. I'll give you a few examples. Humility, unpretentiousness, forbearance, service to the teacher, steadfastness, self-restraint. Amma has even given a whole satsang on steadfastness. Self-restraint, non-attachment, even-mindedness in both desirable and undesirable circumstances, unswerving devotion to Amma. Krishna says me, I'm going to say Amma. Without attachment to anything else, living in holy and sequestered places, and a lot of other points also. But all these things are points that Amma emphasizes, even for her just householder devotees or just even a new person. She will say all these things. So after hearing this long list, it came to light that along with such virtues, we also have to deepen our spiritual understanding, which means deepen our understanding of the Gurupadesha, or what our Guru is trying to teach us. It's not enough to just read this, we have to deepen our understanding of it through listening, Shravana, to the Guru's teachings. If you cannot do it directly or virtually, then you read all those books. Just read them anyhow. That's what I would say, because Awakened Children helps so much. And all the other books like Eternal Wisdom and the Swami and Swamini books, etc. And we went through the whole process of Manana Nidityasanam. You can go through a couple classes ago and hear that. In verses 13 to 18, partially 19 as well, Krishna helped us understand Parabrahman, which is arguably the most important topic in the entire Gita, the Upanishads, and all of the Vedas as well. Understanding what is Param Brahma. Though it is called by many names in the Gita, Kshatrajna, Kshatri, Dehi, Atma, Purusha, Jnayam, Chaitanyam, they all essentially mean the same thing, which is pure consciousness. And if you remember, in that section, it was a little heavy philosophy, but he used a traditional method which is called Adhyaropa Apavada Nyaya. The reasoning to refute superimposition. What does that mean? It means the methodology that is very traditional and uses somewhat contradictory words, the goal of which is to point out something that is beyond all words. Param Brahma, Paramatma. My feeling personally is that this method is the source of the Zen and Taoist koans, like what is the sound of one hand clapping? Or what is your original face before you were born? Questions that just send you into deep meditation. Well, the chapter 13 version of those kind of statements was like, Brahman is neither existent nor non-existent, far away and near. Shining by the functions of all the senses, it is free from the senses, unattached yet sustaining all, devoid of properties yet the experiencer of them, indivisible yet it exists as if divided in beings. So though these expressions can seem cryptic and sometimes even conflicting, when you understand the methodology, they start to make sense. So we have to review that methodology. The master, Krishna or Amma, first uses a familiar reference to make a point. Like, see the light illuminating your hand? Yes, we say. Does the light belong to the hand? And does the light move when your hand moves? Does it get dirty when your hand gets dirty? No, Amma, it doesn't. Well done. Now, remove your hand and try to see the light without the help of your hand. You cannot see the light without the help of your hand. But if you close your eyes, you can meditate on it. So this is the point. Krishna is teaching us through Arjuna to see with the eye of wisdom something that cannot be seen by the physical eye. And this is the way to do it. They give us something familiar, then remove that, and the basic principle behind the example remains, and you have to grasp that. Verse 19 is somewhat part of that same section because Krishna is praising the benefit of that teaching, of that knowledge, of differentiating the Kshatra and the Kshatrajna. He says one attains immortality. So in verses 20 to 24, that topic of differentiating resumes, but the only real difference from the previous discussion is just terminology. In these 5 verses, Krishna said Prakruti and Purusha instead of Kshatra and Kshatrajna. And this was the section where we had that video about the children, the babies crying, seeing their shadows, right? So that'll remind you. Everybody remembers a YouTube video. But the point of showing that, if you might have forgotten that, was that just like babies are ignorant that they have a shadow, we are ignorant of the shadow, Maya, of our true being, which is Brahman. And we're afraid of Maya. Oh my God, what am I going to do? What if I get sick? What if I get COVID? Oh, is the baby going to be healthy? Oh, what about this? What about that? You know, we worry and are so afraid of so many things. And we think that it's all justified, just like the 2-year-old thinks they're justified in being afraid of their shadow. Both of them come from ignorance, just different levels of ignorance. And there's one important thing to remember here, is that Purusha is always consciousness and Prakruti is always matter. But during the Pralaya period, where there is no physical creation, it's just in the potential form or seed form, Prakruti, remember Prakruti is the source or the cause for the physical creation, right? But there's no creation at that time. So it is matter in a seed form only. But when creation begins, Purusha, as the knower of the universe, becomes Kshatrajna, because now there's a Kshatra, there's a Maya, right? So the Purusha, who was just peacefully in Pralaya consciousness, now there's a creation. And that it is becoming the knower of the field, which is Maya. And Prakriti is tangible and concrete matter, Kshatra. So what happens then? Well, it's different now because there was no scope for confusion during the Pralaya. But when that same Purusha and Prakriti are on the physical plane of Maya, the Kshatrajna, the knower, forgets, I am Purusha, I am pure consciousness, and becomes identified with the Kshatram. Unless your name is Mata Amrita Anandamayi Devi, then you're probably suffering from that problem. And Krishna says in verse 22, Purusha, seated in Prakriti, experiences the qualities of Prakriti, the gunas, born of Prakriti, and attachment to the gunas is the cause of his or her birth in various kinds of wombs, good and bad. So on the individual level, our ignorance of the self, the Atman, makes us identify with the Kshatra, this whole world, including the body, our mind, and all of our intellectual thoughts and convictions, and thus we suffer. So the only solution to this samsara is to know beyond a doubt that I am not this body. I am the knower of the body. I am the witness of the body. And that is what is Purusha. Right now we're toying with the idea. It's kind of a pet we have in the house. And I'm going to take my Kshatrajna idea and just kind of play with it and put it away. And no, go back. I'm the Kshatra. I'm the body. Then we open the Gita and we're like, yeah, this is fun. Okay, now I'm going back to being the body. Sadly, that's about as far as it goes for most people. But it has to be constant. That's why we still suffer. Picking up the Gita is not enough. And Krishna referred to Brahman using other terms like Sakshi, Maheshwara, Paramatma, etc. That was the end of that section. And with that, he answered all 6 of Arjuna's questions. So the remainder of the chapter actually forms a conclusion with a summary of the teaching. Now, though it's just a conclusion, that final section has 11 verses in it. It's quite a few. And starts off with one verse on the sadhanas that we can follow to reach that knowledge. And he also includes a verse about devotion, which really puts it into perspective, seeing how if we don't have to read the scriptures. We may not have access to the scriptures, but we can still make progress if we have devotion to a respect-worthy person like Amma and listen and follow their instructions. Then there's a very important verse about how our ignorance leads us to falsely project non-reality onto reality. And the day that we talked about that, we had a very fresh example derived from the live stream that very morning. I'll remind you that the reality that was about one of the brahmacharis who was at AIMS, who had a surgery on his nose. And this is what the reality was. So to make a fair example, we have to have a reality and a non-reality. So the reality was, one of Amma's disciples was walking down a hallway in AIMS hospital, wearing white, and he had gauze protruding from his nostrils because of the surgery he had on his nose. And also, it just happened to be late at night, and it just so happened he was walking near the morgue. That's all the reality. But the night watchman, in his ignorance, falsely projected the image of a dead person from the morgue onto the brahmachari who was walking down the hallway. Wouldn't that scare you if you made that same mistake? It's like a zombie is walking down the hallway because they put the gauze up the nose of the dead people in the morgue also, and they're also wearing white. So it was like a dead body. And so the night watchman went crazy and started screaming and went running out of the hospital. Poor guy. So he had a terrorizing experience, but whose fault was it? Nobody's fault. Certainly not the fault of the brahmachari walking down the hallway. It was all due to the non-real being projected on the real. And according to Krishna's teaching, We are all doing the exact same thing all the time. We're projecting something conscious on this inert body, and we're projecting inertness and mortality onto the immortal consciousness. So we make mistakes both ways. Other points made in this final section were Brahman is all-pervasive, free from actions and its karmic consequences, like the space and the sun. And if we are able to see the self everywhere, he said, we will experience mental equipoise, and we can transcend death and reach the supreme state. He even says we become Brahman by realizing that we always were Brahman. And what I love is Jnanadev's closing words here. He said, the Lord gave to Arjuna all that he had, yet Arjuna's mind was not satisfied. On the contrary, his longing to hear more and more was intensified. With oil replenished, as the lamp illuminates with greater brilliance, the longing in Arjuna's heart to hear more and more intensified. It's a little bit long quotation, but I want you to hear it. It's really sweet. Here is an expert in cooking and liberal-minded hostess. On the other hand, there are guests fully qualified to relish the food. With such a combination as this, it hardly needs mentioning that the hands on both the sides get to work freely. They mutually cooperate, giving rise to immense satisfaction. So happened to the Lord. At the hearer's eagerness to hear, he too felt thrilled fourfold to prolong his discourse. With favorable wind, the clouds rise up fast, or the sea gets into full tide at the appearance of the full moon. In that way, on account of the regard shown by the listeners, the orator's eloquence waxes. Sanjaya then said, now God will make joyous the entire universe, and you, O king, hear that account. Remember, he's talking to King Dhritarashtra. And then Jnanadev talks about, he says, this is what I said. The narrative is one full only with one sentiment of tranquility. Yet by the way I shall expound it, the sentiment of tranquility will tread over the head of Kamadev. It will put life into literature and will make even the nectar's taste insipid in point of sweetness. The phraseology will come up to the level of the moon in point of soft, pleasant coolness, and will make even the divine music of the spheres assume silence before its infatuating eloquence. It will cause even the ghastly order of beings to make their hearts ooze out of righteous feelings. It's like he's going to say that the asuras are going to have righteous feelings just listening to him talk. And it will make the pure-minded people enter into rapt concentration on spiritual meditation. I shall now expand the grandeur of speech, in such a way that the entire universe will be stuffed with Gita interpretations, and will erect an enclosure full of great joy for the world. Let the ears and the mind have their object of life completely accomplished, and let everyone who may have a liking for the subject be able to see the heart of Brahma Jnana, the knowledge of Brahman. Let the Paramatma, the Supreme Spirit, be discernible to the vision of all, ushering in a festival of happiness for all to enjoy. And let the universe enter the days of plenty and prosperity in the form of supreme understanding. This is what Amma's doing. He's describing when Amma comes, basically, which was hundreds of years after him. Now I, who am favored by the grace of the great Guru, Sri Nivritinath, that was his Guru, shall hold the discourse in a way that will bring about all this. So much confidence he has in his Guru's blessing. We should have that much confidence. I shall disentangle the complication resulting from the jumble of similes and puns, explaining the significance of each and every word, and bring out vividly the meaning of the scripture. My Sadguru has made me perfect by equipping me with literary craftsmanship and ability sufficient to carry me through to the destination. Through the grace of the Guru, whatever I preach becomes acceptable, and this has prepared me to hold the discourse on the Gita interpretations. He's going to say even more at the beginning of chapter 14. But before that, we have to close chapter 13 in the traditional way. So chant after me, please. Om Tat Sat Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Sri Krishnarjuna Samvade Kshetra Vibhaga Yogo Nama Trayodashodhyayaha. The meaning is, thus ends the 13th chapter, named Kshatra, Kshatrajna, Vibhaga Yoga, of the Upanishad of the Bhagavad Gita, the scripture of yoga dealing with the science of the Absolute in the form of the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna. Now remember that calling the Bhagavad Gita an Upanishad is not a mistake or some fluke. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the Prasthanatrayi. It's called one of the 3 pillars of this Sanatana Dharma Samskara culture. So, along with the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras, these 3 pillars are the source of authoritative knowledge in this tradition. So Bhagavad Gita is in the same level as the Upanishads. For reasons like this, without the 13th and 14th chapter, I don't know if we would have called it an Upanishad. Because this is where Mahavakyas come, where these great dictums that proclaim the individual soul to be the same as the supreme soul, the universal soul. So that is what brings it to that status of a Upanishad. Now we will enter into chapter 14. There is something on the first page of chapter 14, if you have the book. I'm going to be reading it from the Sanskrit, so if you cannot read Devanagari, you won't be able to read it, but it's the first line at the top. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Atha Ch.14 Gunatraya Vibhaga Yogaha Sri Bhagavan. Hold that thought. Okay? We've entered into the chapter officially. We haven't heard that first verse. We will repeat it in a moment. And now I need to give you an overview of chapter 14. We have entered it officially. And I want to read to you that Jnana Dev has a beautiful opening to this chapter. And he addresses a nondescript guru. It could be Krishna, it could be his Nirvritinath, it could be a general reference, but for us, of course, it is Amma. This is also a bit long, but I feel that it will really set the tone and put us in the right mood because there's so much devotion in it, and it's not this dry intellectual exercise. So, if you will indulge me, I'll read a few pages actually. Remember, he's addressing a nondescript Guru. We don't know, but we can just think of it as Amma. To those from whom you keep yourself hidden, you only show this universe. Deluding the vision of others is hypnotism. Yet your own skill is so wonderful that it enables you to keep hidden your real aspect from others. You are all in the entire universe. I bow down to thee. We know that the quality of sweetness in water, also the forgiveness of Mother Earth, are secured through you. The brilliant mothers of pearls, the sun and the moon that arise and illumine the three worlds, have derived their luster through your splendor. The blowing of the wind is also through your divine power, while the game of hide and seek played by the sky is also through your support. In short, it is through your power that ignorance becomes mighty and knowledge secures the power of vision. Even the Vedas got fatigued while describing you. Isn't that beautiful? Even the Vedas got fatigued while describing you. The Vedas proceed well with the description so long as the essence of yourself is not attained. But once it is attained, both the Vedas and we find ourselves on the common plane of speechlessness. When there remains no trace whatever of duality, and when speech ceases functioning, under these conditions, through what mouth could we extol you? I can find no fitting words to describe your personality. It is therefore the best to stop all praise and place our heads silently at your feet. Let us put our heads silently at Amma's feet mentally. Pranams to you, O Guru, he says, in whatever form you may be. Now deign to be my creditor for making fruitful my composition. Release the capital in the form of your compassion and pour it forth into the bag of my intellect, securing for me the gift of poetic knowledge. With this help, I shall carry on my business and adorn the ears of the saints with auspicious ear ornaments in the form of right judgment. My mind wishes to lay open the hidden treasures in the form of the mystic meaning of the Gita teachings. And I would pray to you to treat my eyes with eyewash in the form of your kindness, to enable me to see those treasures. I implore you to rise up with the clear disk of your pure compassion so that my intellectual vision will be able to perceive at a single glance the entire literary creation. You must become the spring season, the crown jewel amongst the loving, to make the charming vine in the form of my intellect abundantly fruitful with poetry. With your generous and kind vision, rain down copiously so that the Ganges in the form of my intellect should register the highest flood in the form of problems to be solved and established truths to reply. O you, the sole resting place of the universe, let the moon of your favor endow me with a full moon night in the form of vigorous inspiration, so that at its sight the sea of knowledge should swell into full tide, making the channels of the 9 rasas, the 9 sentiments, overflow themselves. Hearing this, the Guru was pleased and said, you have again started praising me on the pretext of making a request. Forget such futile talk and proceed seriously with the revelation of the scripture. Make it lovely and easy to comprehend. Do not allow the deep interest of the audience to diminish. Even Amma was giving such advice to a brahmachari the other day. You have to keep the audience interest, so the Mahatmas have the same concern. Thereupon, Sri Jnaneshwar said, I was only waiting to hear the words, continue teaching the scripture, coming from your illustrious mouth. With your blessing, I shall now expound the original scriptural phrases and words in an eloquent and lucid way. Yet my only wish is that, by the Guru's grace, such eloquence should develop in my faculty of speech as would be able to drown the boat of doubtfulness in the heart of people, and would also whet their appetite to hear more and more. Oh, he just gets you really going. Your philosophical and contemplative juices, right, really start flowing when you hear Jnanadev speak. Like the previous chapter, this chapter is part of the third section of the Bhagavad Gita, the last 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. So if you remember, the main teaching in this final section is jnana, or knowledge, spiritual wisdom. Like chapter 13, the topic is going to be the same: Atma, Anatma, Viveka, the differentiation of the self and the non-self. In chapter 13, Krishna called it differentiating between the Kshatra and the Kshatrajna. In this chapter, it will be very similar, but more of a comparison between that which has form and that which is formless. It's called Saguna, Nirguna, Viveka, differentiating between that which has form and what doesn't have form. So why the shift in standpoint? The purpose is so that after differentiating, we will know what is to be embraced and what is to be relinquished or rejected. Just imagine at the end of chapter 13, after all that discussion, somebody says, okay, I get the difference between Kshatra and Kshatrajna, Maya and consciousness. I choose Maya. Great, that's my choice. So, they didn't learn that choosing Maya is leading to suffering. So to avoid a calamity, we need to understand the reason why we should identify with the consciousness, not Maya, not with the Kshatra. And that logic is what we're going to get here in chapter 14. The reasoning will go like this. The Kshatra, this whole material universe, consists of what we call the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And these gunas, though we might found them wonderful, it's like a roller coaster ride, But according to Vedanta, they are poison for us because they are the cause of samsara. The idea is that in order to become free from the bondage of samsara, we should absolutely not identify with the Kshatra. But the consciousness, pure consciousness, is free from all qualities. It's formless, and there it never dies, and it never is born either. So it's untouched by Maya. If you want to avoid suffering, that's the wise choice. So in chapter 14, Krishna is going to point out all the defects of the Kshatra, of Maya, all the ways it binds us and all these qualities it has. And then he discusses the Kshatrajna and basically how wonderful it is. He talks about its liberating nature and how much better it is than the Kshatra. So in modern parlance, we might call it a marketing campaign. But here, the marketer, who's Krishna, has no vested interest and doesn't get any benefit from, dictating 700 verses on a battlefield for Arjuna and the future generations. Just like Amma does not get any benefit from sitting there for hours on the stage, listening to people tell her things that she already knows, or saying things that are wrong and she has to correct them. So the structure of the chapter is as follows. The first 2 verses are an introduction, pointing to the glory of this rare, liberating knowledge. And then the next 2 verses, 3 and 4, will discuss creation and its purpose. And Krishna is going to point out that the whole world is born out of these 3 gunas, these 3 qualities of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And that's including the body, mind, everything. And there's nothing in this world that is devoid of these 3 qualities. And it is these very same gunas that are responsible for our samsara because we identify with them. That's why they're the troublemakers. Really, we are the troublemakers because we identify with them, but without the gunas, there wouldn't be any identification. The next section is verse 5 through 18. And here is where Krishna goes into more detail about the aspects of the gunas, 5 different aspects of them. Lakshanam bandhana prakara lingam palam gatihi, like that. But he's going to show us how they bind us, their indications, how to be liberated from them, and the effect that they have on us when we are in the body, and the effect they have on us after death. Believe it or not, they still affect us after death. Verses 19 to 20 are the main ones in terms of the teaching. And here Krishna will tell how to go beyond these three gunas. In other words, how to become gunatita. And the sadhana prescribed here is, not surprisingly, knowledge, jnana, which is self-knowledge, just any old knowledge, not any old knowledge. And the reward of which is the realization of our oneness with God. And then Arjuna asks, this piques his curiosity, so he asks 3 questions, and those questions followed by Krishna's answers comprise the final portion of the chapter. So, now we can actually read that first verse. We will start from that. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, one moment. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Param Bhuya Pravakshami Jnananam Jnanamuttamam Yat Jnatva Munaya Sarve Param Siddhim Ito Gathaha. The Blessed Lord said, I shall discuss once more the supreme wisdom, which is above all knowledge. I put those in commas. And having acquired which, all the sages attained the highest perfection after this life. I'm a little bit of a syntax freak. So after, like before which, I put the commas and all that, but you can do your punctuation however you like. But the point is that all the sages attained the highest perfection after this life. So here Krishna himself feels the need to add elaboration on the topic of jnana, even though he just talked about it in chapter 13, and now he's saying something very similar. So it's going to be a continuation of chapter 13. That is the point. The very beginning of the chapter, he's already resuming the previous topic. So this is the statutory warning for all of you. After the kind of heavy philosophy of chapter 13, if you were looking forward to some light conversation, you should probably re-examine your hopes, because it's not going to get very light right away. But it's a good challenge for us to understand these deeper teachings. His words in this verse also intimate the reason for this additional elaboration. The reason being, it is the supreme wisdom which is above all knowledge. So it's not so easy to grasp. Arjuna may have felt like he understood properly, but Krishna knows better. We too may feel that we pretty much understood chapter 13, but the teacher himself is not satisfied, so he's going to explain again from a different angle. And this shows how similar Krishna and Amma are, because if you watch this morning's live stream, the brahmachari had barely started. He just said like 2 lines. And then Amma took the mic and clarified the topic and its importance for almost a half an hour. And the end result was that she had to sit there on the stage for an extra half an hour. So it was like 3.5 hours that she had to sit there. And the funniest thing is that the last part, which took a lot of time also, was she was listening to like a 6 or 7-year-old boy, say things completely backwards. He's very cute and very endearing. Everybody was enjoying it. And then at one point, he said, "Amma, you're my guru." And then it's like the simplest thing. And Amma says, "Really?" Oh, this wasn't translated in English, that's why I'm saying it. And he says, "Yeah, ma." And she says, "Really?" And he says, And then he said, just like Govindapada was Shankaracharya's guru, Kunya Niranjan, him, is Amma's guru. And then everybody burst out laughing. And then he said, "Did I say something wrong?" And Amma said, "No, yeah, it's okay. Just say it one more time." And then he said it wrong again. And then he also said that he got it all mixed up to the point where he said Shankaracharya was the guru of Govindapada. It's the opposite. And then Amma said, "Okay, I want you to sing a song." And he made that mistake about Shankaracharya's guru once. And Amma said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Sure." And she said, "You really sure?" And he said, "I'm sure." And then Amma was like, "You remember Bodha?" There was this song he used to sing about Bodha, which means awareness, alertness, attentiveness. And he said, "Yeah." And she says, "Why don't you sing that?" And he was singing it, and he still didn't get the point. So anyhow, she sat there an extra 10 minutes at least just for that, even though the boy didn't really realize his mistake. But this is how much attentiveness the Acharya or the Guru has for our understanding of the subject matter. So that's not a surprise that Krishna is repeating everything. It's good for us. How many times has Amma told us that anger is harmful to us? It's poison. They injected guinea pigs with it, and then they died or something like that. And there's so many reasons. It's a crazy man. Only a crazy person would get angry when someone gets angry at them. So many examples. But have we relinquished anger for good? No. How many times has Amma told us that we should try to change ourselves and not others? Still, we do the same thing. We do the opposite all the time. So what is this wisdom that is so important that it has to be repeated? Well, remember, it's not the knowledge that was mentioned in chapter 13, because that word knowledge in chapter 13 had a very special connotation to it, which he doesn't use elsewhere. And like I said a minute ago, it was the knowledge, it was not real knowledge, it was virtues and values that help us attain knowledge. But here, he's talking about the self-knowledge. And that knowledge amounts to discerning the difference between the Atma and the Anatma, Kshatra and Kshatrajna, Dehi and Deha, Purusha and Prakruti. All these processes of differentiating amount to the same thing. And the repetition is needed because, as we said before, it is a very, very subtle topic and an important one. How is it important? Well, it's not only the supreme above all other forms of knowledge, as he speaks in the verse. It is also because, unlike most subjects, even difficult subjects, it is not a mere intellectual process. For this knowledge to take place, a profound inner shift has to take place. We cannot attain this knowledge without a deep cognitive shift, because the object of the knowledge here is not really an object at all. It is the subject itself. It is me, my own true self. All other knowledge that you would learn at a university, even a PhD level, is easier to acquire because it boils down to something material, something that we can objectify. It boils down to some kind of material knowledge. Now, someone might say, no, it's about psychology or something. Well, according to Vedanta, the mind is also material, just on a subtler level. So knowledge of anatma, knowledge of Maya, doesn't require such a profound cognitive shift as Atma Jnana. So that is why this Atma Jnana, the knowledge of the self, is considered to be very important. And Jnanadev says here, in fact, this knowledge is our own, yet it becomes foreign to us because of our liking, because of our developing a liking for this world and the next one. It means we're also, if we're not, maybe we give up on this world, but then we have attachment to, heaven is going to be like this when I get there. And then that part of the verse where Krishna says, having acquired which all the sages attained the highest perfection after this life. What does he mean? First of all, it means that it's worth the effort to attain this knowledge. And Shankaracharya also says that it is above all other forms of knowledge because the fruit of that knowledge is the highest result possible, which is moksha. So it's a uttama jnana because of uttama phalam. No other branch of knowledge can claim that. They can only give artha, kama, and dharma, which is material security, pleasure and enjoyment, and even dharma, which in this case means more like getting good karma. Usually when you read about dharma in the Gita, it's more often than not about doing good deeds to accumulate punya merits. So any kind of knowledge, may be able to offer these three, artha, kama, and dharma, but never moksha. No worldly knowledge can give us liberation. So even the Vedas, when they talk about the rituals and all the things, sadhanas we can do to acquire some worldly gain, none of that will make us achieve moksha. Only the knowledge in the Upanishads and texts like the Gita or Amma's teachings, only these can give moksha. So this knowledge is superior from two angles. The object of it, which is the Supreme Self, is superior, and the benefit or the result of that knowledge is also superior. Jnanadev says here, all other types of knowledge prove to be mere dreams, unsubstantial, before this knowledge. Just as the wind is ultimately dissolved in the sky, or just as with the rising of the sun in the sky, the brilliance of the moon and other stars gets dimmed, or just as all the rivers, big and small, get merged in the waters of the deluge at the time of world dissolution. In that way, with the rise of this knowledge, other types of knowledge get extinguished, and therefore this knowledge is the best. So let's say I spend 25 years studying something, and I become an expert in that, and I can talk about it. Maybe next birth I'll have that talent, and then maybe that will help me in some material way. But when the whole universe is gone with the pralaya and dissolved, well, that knowledge is not going to, as they say in common parlance, it's not worth a heap of beans, right? During the samhara. So, yes, that's what he's talking about. And here, there's a reference to a muni, or which is translated here as a sage. And that word muni means one who is disciplined or measured in speech. And that's one of the meanings, that they're mauni, they don't speak. Doesn't mean they don't speak at all, it means that they're very measured and sort of miserly in their words. They don't waste their words. They take the same care with words that we take with our money. But another meaning for muni is also mananat munihi, which means the one who is ever reflecting and cogitating. Shankaracharya gives a third interpretation to this word of muni, which is that it indicates a sannyasi. Of course, he is very extreme Vedanta and a sannyasi himself, and he was tutoring his sannyasi disciples. So it's understandable that he interpreted it to be a sannyasi. But in a universal way, we can just think of it as a seeker. Because Amma says the Gita is also for householders, for everybody. So that means it cannot just mean a sannyasi or someone who's always in Maunam. So we can think of it as a seeker. Another encouraging thing is that Krishna says all the sages, which means there were many of them. And that kind of makes us feel like the odds might just be in our favor if there were lots of them. Shankaracharya says that the highest perfection after this life means freedom from death, or videha mukti. Videha mukti means like at the time you leave the body, you don't take any birth afterwards. You will never have to be reborn. In our case, after leaving the body, we would merge in Amma. So that is a pretty big carrot. It should be to dangle before an Amma devotee. But that's what it's supposed to mean. In this way, Krishna sets the tone for the entire chapter, discussing the main topic of jnanam, glorifying it, and describing its result. I'm tempted to go one more verse. I'll try to make it brief. Let's chant one more verse. Yeah, it's all Jnanadev's fault for, making us all so excited. Just blame him. Okay, we're going to read verse 2. Idam jnanam upasritya mama sadharmyam agataha sargepi nopajayante pralaye navyatanti cha. They who have practiced, or we could say taken refuge in this wisdom, have entered into, or we could say attained my being. They who have done this are neither born again at the time of creation, nor are they disturbed at the time of dissolution. This verse provides more detail about the glorious result of this knowledge. In the previous verse, Krishna only said that they attained the highest perfection. But what does that mean? Well, depending on our perspective or interests, we may think it's going to be with Krishna and Vaikuntha, or going to Kailas and be with Shiva. Or if you're an Amma devotee, it might mean that you go to Amritapuri and become the next Tumban. If I could only be Amma's Tumban or Shakti or Bhakti, that's all I want, right? But it doesn't mean any of the above. It means nothing less than attaining the same nature as God, Krishna, Shiva, Amma. They attain the same nature as mine. That's what it means. It means we attain the knowledge, I am Satchidananda Rupa Swarupa. So I am Amma herself. That is the realization that we would get. And we don't want to be Tumban. We don't want to be Bhakti. We want to be Amma, one with Amma. So what is the benefit of becoming one with God? Or we could even say Amma. Just because we like Amma, we can't assume that everybody is going to want to become with Amma. Well, the benefit of becoming one with a realized being, or we could say God, is that we become immortal. What? They have a body also. Yes, but if you ask Amma, are you the body? She will say no. And that's her actual experience. So Amma has said many times she has no birth, no death. So becoming one with her means becoming one with that which has no birth or death. In fact, this is the only way to transcend birth and death. The only way to experience the true meaning of Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya, which we chant all the time. So this verse proceeds to confirm that very clearly, saying that they are not born again even in the next creation. Jnanadev puts it nicely saying, they become eternal through my eternity. This is Krishna speaking through Jnanadev. They become eternal through my eternity and become perfect through my perfection. They become as full with eternal bliss as I am. There remaining no distinction whatsoever between us. So imagine if Amma says that. You will become as full with eternal bliss as Mata Amrita Anandamayi. That is a pretty convincing argument. Not only that, when the grand dissolution of the universe takes place, they won't even feel any disturbance. Just imagine. You'll be sitting, relaxing on the couch, feet on the footrest, hot chai in hand, and you're ready to watch the whole show of the great dissolution of the universe. Okay, no sofa and footrest, but you get the picture. No sorrow at all. They themselves become Mahapralaya Sakshini or Mahapralaya Sakshi, like it says in the 1,000 Names, the witness of the grand dissolution of the universe. That means pure consciousness. That's the only thing that's left. More importantly, the implication is that they will never die because they have cast away all identification with Anatma, with Maya. They know that it is the body that is born and dies, and they know that they are the one who witnesses all of that, who knows Maya and is not involved in Maya, something that never takes birth or dies. In fact, we cannot say that they become immortal. They know the reality that they have always been the immortal Kshatra. So that would be our experience also. It's not like I became immortal. I realize, because either you're immortal or not, right? Just by definition. So you come to realize that you were always immortal. Here, Sri Ramakrishna Deva once said, true spiritual pursuit leads the seeker to samadhi, in which the world and the individuality are eliminated. All relative existence vanishes, leaving behind Brahman, the Absolute. That is going to be the experience. So this is the elucidation that Krishna gives through verse 2 of the chapter. Thus, these first two verses comprise the introduction to the main topic, which Krishna will discuss next. And Jnanadev builds up the suspense by saying, in this way, the Lord praised the greatness of knowledge with much fervor, in order to create a taste for it in the mind of Arjuna. At this, Arjuna went into a wondrous state, as if there were ears all over his body, and he got himself into rapt concentration. Then what happened? We'll find out next time. And next week, we're going to build up the suspense to Swamiji's retreat, not this Gita class. So the suspense of this part of the Gita is going to have to wait 2 weeks. That's okay. In between, you'll have a wonderful retreat with Swamiji over the weekend. I'll be there too. We'll all be there. And it'll be a festival like Jnanadev was talking about. There are a couple of questions. The ones that I was contemplating taking last week, but I decided it was too late. So here's one. The question is, it was from a couple weeks ago. The person said, you said that a man demolished the darshan hut, but he should have double-checked with Amma before doing so. Then she says, I feel confused because there are so many stories about people not following Amma's wishes and then getting into trouble. And we're also told to have faith and follow her words, even if they do not make sense to us. I've personally had the experience where I asked Amma the same question a few times and she finally just changed her answer to make me happy. But later it became obvious that I should have listened to her the first time. So if she tells us to do something, especially if it's an important issue, you're saying that we should always double check with her? So here's my response. It depends on the question, for sure. In the case of the man who demolished the darshan hut, which was the one that was mentioned in some of the awakened children's, the original darshan hut was a different one, but from the mid-80s, I believe, the hut that I'm referring to was what was being referred to. And so there was a history there, and destroying that or demolishing that was something that affected a lot of people, perhaps emotionally. And it had been a long time since Amma had made the comment, and in the meantime, things may have changed, right? So we have to be careful, especially with official ashram projects and things like that. It's happened to me also. Amma told me to do X, I can't remember what it was. And then I never went back and checked with her, and I went and did that. And then in the meantime, the situation had changed. And it was no longer necessary. And, she was like, you never checked back with me. And then I should have, because just asking one time and then having 6 months go and then do it doesn't make sense. Amma's giving us instructions about what is important to do in the present moment. But if the gap opens up, we may need, if the situation changes also. Let's say somebody says, can I come to Amritapuri? And Amma says, yes. And then, 6 months later, she didn't know she was pregnant, or he didn't know that he was going to become a father. And then maybe say 9 months later, they're pregnant and they show up there. And Amma says, wait a second, you're bringing the baby when it's so little to India? She might be surprised. I'm just giving examples. So when the scenario changes, situation changes, when a lot of time passes, then, that's the kind of question that needs to be reconfirmed, at least from my perspective. So we have to have the proper shraddha. You also have to apply the answer properly. She may say something and then we misunderstand it. And then, we come up with a solution and then you're not quite sure whether that's actually what she meant. You may need a clarification, or at least ask somebody close to Amma to verify whether that's really what she's meaning. I mean, I'll give you an example, a funny one. It was an American program. And this one fellow went up to Amma during darshan. And he, when Amma holds back those days, she didn't say my darling son, she just said everything in Malayalam. And at that time, he was a man, so she would say ponnamane, 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 ponnamane. And then he was hearing banana, 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 banana. And so he came up to me here and he said, why is Amma saying banana, banana, banana in my ear? And I said, no, you're just hearing it wrong. It means my darling son in Malayalam. And the next day, she was saying banana again. And so he didn't come to me again. He went out and he bought a bunch of bananas. And he said, Amma, you want bananas, right? Isn't that right? She's like, you're bananas, Anyhow, so some things need confirmation, some things don't. So it does need a little bit of common sense. So this person is asking, in the last class of Bhagavad Gita, you gave an example of mixing vinegar and baking soda. You said there is no doer, but they did not get mixed by themselves. The person doing the experiment mixed them, and so he or she is the doer. If you say nature or Prakruti did it, still there's a power that created the Prakruti, and since there is nothing else but God, it is not evident that everything is done by Him only, by both the good. Okay, it is a good point. Don't forget that chemical reactions take place in nature all the time. This person's also referring to it. So even if I'm not there putting them together, there's always these natural interactions taking place, and that is basically the definition of Maya. So, yes, this morning also, the talks were all about how Maya is divine. Krishna owns it. He says, my divine Maya. So, yes, when he says my divine Maya, he's speaking from the standpoint of Ishvara. He's not speaking from the standpoint of non-duality. So we have to be very careful. Either because you cannot mix non-duality with duality. So if we recognize Maya as something that we have to contend with, that means that we also have to accept the fact that yes, it is God's Maya. And we call Brahman plus Maya we call that God, Ishvara. But when you go to the non-dual level, there is no Maya. It's just a shadow. And it's like saying the shadow is interacting with the pavement or with the ground. There's no interaction actually happening. It's just the shadow doesn't have an existence of its own. So when we look at it from the non-dual perspective, there is no Maya. And from that standpoint, Krishna says that it's just the gunas interacting with the gunas. And the knower or the consciousness is just watching it. The consciousness never does anything. So it's from that non-dual perspective that we can negate the presence of any doership. If we talk about Maya, in duality, then yes, I'm the one who does it, and then I'm the one who gets the karmic consequences. So if you want a clarification, you can write another question. You can rephrase your question without mixing Dvaita and Advaita, without mixing dualism and non-dualism. There was another question about one of the satsangs, and I'm going to find the answer after that. Again, we went over time. Blame it on me and not Jnanadev. He's a perfect being, so we can't blame him. But we will conclude now, and after that, just have a few moments of silence and conclude. I don't think we have time for meditation today. Om Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long, deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Om Amriteshwariyai Namaha. The Gita class will resume, as I said, 2 weeks from now. Day after tomorrow, the East Coast Ashram will be presenting the bhajans. So please, I invite you to participate in that one, as we won't be broadcasting bhajans from Chicago. Om Namah Shivaya.